I've always loved this story because I related to Mary of Bethany. I always thought maybe she was the odd duck in the family. Martha was probably, and I actually have a sister who's very much like Martha. She's really great at being welcoming people and kind of being the Martha Stewart. Isn't that a fun coincidence? Martha Stewart. She's the great host, and she puts together all the food. She remembers everything. If you get in a family gathering, my sister will be in the kitchen with some other people and doing that really important work, which I never remember to do. I'm always out over with the other people having some theological conversation or something. I can imagine in that moment Martha felt frustrated and wanted Jesus as the authority to tell Mary to get in line. But Jesus saw in Martha that her good work was getting to the point where it was overwhelming even her. And she was distracted. The holy work that Martha was called to do, that she was good at, that was necessary, that was well received, was getting to the point where she was getting distracted and frustrated and irritated. Has that ever happened to you? Where you find yourself short with people, irritated at dumb things? It's usually a red flag that we have to take a break. The part we don't hear Jesus saying that I imagine him saying is, do you want to come and sit down too? Just for a few minutes? It's okay. To me, Mary was listening to something inside of her that said, I don't really care what the world says I should do. I'm going to do what's good for my soul. And I love that. And one of the things about sabbaticals in the pastoral understanding, in the pastoral world, is that after a certain period of time, 5, 6, 7 years that a pastor has been in a place serving one congregation, that they get this paid time away that's not a vacation, it's something else. It's a time to relax and rest because, believe it or not, I can be like the Martha, where I get distracted and frustrated by little things. Hopefully you didn't notice that too much. And taking that time for 3 months to sit at the feet of Jesus and bring my Mary back out can help me then to come back and do the work with a clearer focus and a clearer purpose. So this first slide that I'll have you see is sort of my Mary of Bethany slide. This was taken at Feathered Pipe Ranch in Montana, where I spent a week early on in my sabbatical. It's a very, very beautiful and restful place. It seems to summarize for me sabbatical, rest for the weary. What's cute about it is, you know, this was, we come from Minnesota, right, where we have the land of 10,000 lakes. And they would say, come and look at our lake, which was really just that. And I thought, that's a pond, but I won't tell them. Anyway, I'll go to the next slide. One of the first things that I did is after the kids got out of school, so just a couple weeks into my sabbatical, is we went on a family vacation to Door County. And if you don't know where Door County is, it's all the way on the other side of Wisconsin. There's all these little towns together, and it was sort of our time to be a family before the kids were going to go to California to spend most of the summer with their dad. Next picture. And so we did some of the good sightseeing things. We were on a trolley. We went on a boat tour, and this is just a lovely picture of us overlooking the lake. Next slide. And then after a couple weeks, I went to Feathered Pipe Ranch in Montana, and this was a picture of our group. And these are people from all over America, all walks of life, all ages. And here's what's interesting about this is that when I knew I probably couldn't go to Bali, which was my original plan, that COVID vaccines were not spreading fast enough around the world, and I needed another one. I said, fine, I'll have to do one in America, but it has to meet certain qualifications. And I'd go into all these little search engines for retreat sites, and I said, well, it has to be at least 5 days long. And I'm not going to be in Arizona in the baking heat. That is not restful for me. And over again, the same retreat came up. Feathered pipe, feathered pipe. I thought, okay, I'm going to go. I think God wants me to be there, although I don't know why. And we came there, and it was led by the gentleman in the center with the hat on. He is a teacher of Native American spirituality. He's a shaman. And he was leading us through all sorts of beautiful prayers, so much prayers and singing and even dancing around the fire and all these wonderful activities. And I was diving deeply into it because I knew I was supposed to learn something. And day after day I wondered, what am I here to learn, God? Because as beautiful as what he was teaching me was, I knew I wasn't going to go home and embrace Native American spirituality that he was teaching fully like that. It wasn't necessarily me. And then finally, one day, it hit me. All week long, he'd been having us walk through nature. He'd been having us really notice the earth between our feet, beneath our feet. He was talking about how we could look at every single tree as a brother and a sister. That when we greet a stream, we stop and say hello to it. To know that God made all these things around it and to honor how sacred everything is. And it was such a beautiful thing. And as he was talking, it dawned on me, well, that sounds like St. Francis of Assisi, one of my favorite spiritual leaders, of whom I had just started a journal with his picture on the front. And I started laughing because it seemed so obvious. I loved St. Francis because of his humility, because of his simplicity, the way he wanted to follow Jesus. And I'd sort of ignored the fact that St. Francis had this special relationship to nature where he called everything brother and sister. And apparently he had preached a sermon to the birds. And that once there was a wolf terrorizing a village, and he went up and had a conversation with it, and it stopped. And I thought, those are just fun stories. People are trying to elevate how cool he was. None of that stuff could really have happened. And then I started to hear stories at this retreat, and I started to rethink that. And I wonder if there is something deeply missing in our Christian faith in regards to our heart relationship to nature. So I'm going to talk more about that in the future, but I'm going to leave it at that. The next slide, please. This is me, and the camp is those tiny white dots below. So I hiked up this trail and got a fun picture, and the earrings that I wore were earrings made by the particular tribe that our leader was coming from. And one of the things that happened to me, too, that was really powerful on this retreat is every time I go to these little retreats, whether it's yoga or something else, I usually encounter an interesting group of people. In fact, one of the people on here that I met and got along with really well was a Buddhist monk training in Amazonian shamanism. There you go. Wonderful young man. We had excellent conversations, just a gentle person. But I've always been nervous to go to these retreats and tell them what I do for a living. It always makes for an awkward pause, especially because there are people who've had really negative experiences at church. And for me to come out and say, well, I'm a pastor, can sometimes make them feel like, oh no, is she going to judge me? In fact, early on when it came out that I was a Lutheran pastor, our leader goes, Lutheran pastor? Well, what are you doing here? And we had a great laugh and a great conversation. And the truth is, as I began to let that out, I had wonderful conversations all week long that I wouldn't have had if people didn't know what I did for a living. And I realized that week, I felt like God was again trying to teach me something very powerful by saying, yes, there has been pain that the church has caused, but you are one of the people they need to know who's working in the church. And I felt like I needed to claim that identity more and be a bridge, truly be a bridge with some of these people I was encountering in the Christian church. And I started to journal in my journal, be a bridge. I'm hearing that, be a bridge. I get it. The reason I go to these places, the reason I go to the mosque and to synagogues and to New Age retreat centers is so that I can be a bridge for you, but also for them. At the end of the retreat, one woman came up to me, and as we were giving each other hugs, and she said, Siri, I never really grew up in the church or anything like that, and I just never really thought much about the Christian faith. But I really like what I see in you. That was a wake-up call for me, to not feel so scared to share who I am and what I do, but to hope to try to actively be a bridge in a gentle and a beautiful way. And the next slide. Some of you might find this familiar. I went several times, once by myself, a couple times with Derek, and then Wednesday night brought my kids with me. Went to feed my starving children and packed. It was one of the things I felt strongly that I wanted to do was to do some service. Service alone, and the next slide. I'd pick up garbage around my neighborhood. I live close to a convenience store, a liquor store, and then there's apartments and a pond. And somehow between that transition, a lot of stuff gets littered, a lot. Every single time I go for a walk in my neighborhood, I could bring a bag with me. And a lot of times this summer, I focused simply on the pond. As the water level dropped, I got my gloves and my boots and I waded in there and pulled out plastic bags that had been in the lake for years sometimes, and tried to make things nice for the ducks and the geese and all the animals that live there, because they deserve to have a habitat that is clean and free from garbage. Next slide. And here was another God laughing at me, giving me like that nudge. Derek and I went to Salem, Massachusetts, which I thought would be a real hoot. And I wanted to learn about it. And the first night that we were there, we walked into a wand shop. And we were the only customers, and there was this older woman there, and she began to just tell me all sorts of things. And I said, well, this is really, interesting. What's the difference between all these different wands? And she brought me right up to one, and she said, this is called a unicorn wand. And she began to talk about it, and then she said, by the way, people don't always know this, but the unicorn is a medieval symbol of Christ, and how Jesus sacrificed himself for others. And she goes, no, it's not something I just talk about all the time. And I thought, isn't it interesting that that's the wand you showed me? Once again, I felt God was saying, everywhere you go, no matter what faith tradition that person is, I'm there with you, and I'm there with them. So I got a unicorn wand as a symbol of Christ's healing and Christ's love. Isn't that interesting? And the next slide. And that's just me with the iconic Bewitched. If any of you watched Bewitched in the 1950s or 60s or so, they put up a statue right in the middle of the Salem Square, so I had to get my picture taken with her. Next slide. And then finally, towards the end, the kids got back from California, and we went off to Colorado to spend time with my larger family. And once we were done with that, the four of us went up to a couple days. We went to Rocky Mountain National Park, and here we're on the fourth highest peak of the Rocky Mountain National Park. The kids look thrilled, don't they? No. And the next slide. Then we went to Devil's Tower, which the indigenous people call Bear Lodge Tower. And we had a very warm but beautiful walk around the perimeter of the tower. And this was one thing that I thought this was really beautiful. As we're walking along, at some point we were kind of spaced out, so I was walking alone, and it got really quiet. There was really no one else around. And I started to do what I had learned at Feathered Pipe. I started to talk to the mountain and to greet the mountain. Hello, I'm here to visit you. I honor you. You were here a long time before me, and you're going to be here a long time after me. I'm just a little thing. I'm just a little thing, but I come here with good intentions to greet you. Hello. And just then a bunch of deer appeared, which was a beautiful symbol of the heart that I learned at Feathered Pipe. And they looked at me, and I looked at them, and I kept walking so they knew I wasn't hunting. Kept walking, and I watched for about 5 minutes as there were deer. And I felt once again it was God's way of saying, yep, that's good what you're doing. This is what you need to learn. This is what you need to do, is to stop and to honor and to see the sacred, to see the beauty. There's so much more that I can say. You'll hear me talking about what I've learned about the connection to nature, connection to the heart, about making our faith personal and real on a level different from what I've ever experienced. But I really want us to move forward with this idea. We do live in a time of great fear in this world. And fear is something that can attract a lot of darkness. I think we're seeing that. But perfect love casts out fear. And so it is time for us to really focus on our heart, to focus on seeing and listening to what God is telling us in our heart. I spent all summer doing that, and as I sort of hinted at, I thought I knew what I was going to learn this summer, and God said, no, not that. We're going to learn something else. And a lot of it had to do with stopping and listening and making time to connect to the heart. So I'll be talking more about that. We might do some practices on that later. But I think it's such a powerful thing that Jesus needs in his church, is that the church is a beacon of love in a world of fear. Amen. We'll take a little bit of time for journaling and reflection if you have something to write with you, or you can just ponder what was the learning you had this summer about God or the church or yourself? Is there something you want to do more of and hold on to, or is there something that you feel we can let go of or you can let go of? We'll just take a little time to ponder that.